booktube and welcome to your daily penguin. This is our tour through my Penguin Classic wall, and we are going just book by book. I am intentionally not making a syllabus out of this, so I don't know what's coming next. We've dealt with some massive books over the course of the, 6 months now that we've been doing this. We've seen the Domesday book, which for some reason was made into a Penguin Classic. We've seen the King James Bible, the unabridged Boswell's Life of Johnson, a shorter version of the Diary of Samuel Pepys that could have been much longer, and even the Tale of Genji, which is also immense. And today we are also dealing with an immense book. It's a Penguin Classic that is definitely one to have. You don't want an abridgment of this book at all. You might think you do, but you don't. And that is this. That is Clarissa by Samuel Richardson. This is from the 1748, something like that, and it's, as you can see, enormous, absolutely enormous. It's so big that I periodically have to buy a new copy because my old one falls apart. This is about at the upper limit of how big you can make a paperback and have it survive for any length of time. And this is, most of you will know the story. This is an enormous epistolary novel. That's all it is. It's just a novel in letters. This Penguin edition is 1,500 pages long and could have been longer. The editor here, Angus Ross, does a fantastic job with the introduction in trying to make sense for you, the reader, out of the unbelievably tangled provenance of this book and how really many different editions could be made. And you will sometimes see this in abridgments. It's on one merciless level. It is easy to look at this and say, oh, well, I could abridge this. I could make this 200 pages. But those of you who have maybe read this, I don't know how many of you have read Clarissa. It begs not to be abridged. It weaves a world of its own. The story of Clarissa Harlowe and the horrible marriage that she is pushed into, and the horrible man that's waiting to defile and destroy her life is what are you doing? What are you doing? How am I supposed to talk about Clarissa with you choking over there? She makes that choking noise. What are you doing? Huh? She makes that choking noise. She's not actually choking. She's just made that noise her whole life. Anyway, there are no miniature schnauzers in this book. Or it would have been handled far more expeditiously. Although, oh my. Anyway, the point I was trying to make was that Richardson, I mean, he wrote this in epistolary form. One of the structural advantages of an epistolary form novel is elasticity. You can just stretch the thing out forever if you do that. And he had a financial reason to make this the longest book in the world. But he was also inspired. He was inspired while he was doing it. So this is one of those, it's not always true, but this is one of those very long books where the more you get of it, the more you're going to want of it. I've never understood abridgments of this except maybe, I guess, for classrooms where the teacher somehow quixotically wants to introduce students to Richardson and to what is regarded as his greatest book, but know perfectly well what most students would do if they saw a book this size. They would just laugh. They wouldn't even bother to bring it to school. They would just revolt en masse, except for the one or two that you always get in a classroom that would love this, would love the look of this. Tell me more about this. This is amazing. The size of it is amazing. I don't know if those one or two exist. Maybe they're gone completely now, demographically speaking. I think Penguin, at one point, Penguin Classics made a very short abridgment of this book. But the point I'm trying to make, it's kind of a hopeless point. I've mentioned this book a couple of times on this channel before, and the point I'm trying to make is that the proper response to this book is to surrender to it. As loaded a response as that is, considering the plot line of Clarissa. The proper response to this, like the proper response to Dance to the Music of Time, or, as I've heard from so many of its devotees, to In Search of Lost Time, is surrender. surrender to it, and that then you will be borne along on its current, and the length will become irrelevant. I know that that's true in the case of Dance to the Music of Time. I have never been able to surrender to Proust, and I can definitely attest that it's true in this case. It's difficult, but it is to do. But if you do it, you are going to have an amazing reading experience. So your Penguin Classic is a recommend on both the technical and the personal level, because this is a fantastic novel, incredibly moving, and also this edition from Penguin Classics is one of those I've mentioned many times before, that if you have if you're a reprint house, you have a few paths open to you. One is very comparatively easy. Just reprint. Just take the work that's in common domain, find a nice clean edition of it, and reprint it. And make sure, first of all, that the edition itself is not copyright, but then just reprint it. And the typical way to do that, to make sure your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted, is to go to an edition that's so old that it too is in public domain, and then just reprint that edition. If you want to increase your trouble and your outlay just a bit, then in addition to that, reprinting that text, you will commission a new introduction by some book reviewer or academic or a specialist, even an actor of some kind. And if you want to go even more than that, if you want to go one step beyond that, you will produce an edition that is actually valuable, that isn't just a by the numbers reprint, but that does a lot of work. And this is one of those. This is pretty much the only unabridged Clarissa edition that I've ever seen on the the open book market, and an amazing thing in its own right. Scholars of this book almost certainly will read it through this edition at least once. There may be scholarly editions out there, but they'll find it and come to know it and carry it around through this paperback. I could kick myself. I was at the I think it was in the Harvard bookstore across the river in Cambridge a couple of years ago, and I saw a brand new Penguin Classic of Clarissa, the kind that doesn't have the bar at the top, and it doesn't have the block letters. Instead, it has the script letters along the side, and I didn't get it, and I should have. One should always have. I mean, I'm probably no more than a year away from a reread of this, and a reread of this will probably kill this volume. One should always have a Clarissa in reserve. Again, an explosive thing to say when it comes to the contents of the book, but you know what I mean. So your Penguin for today is a recommend on both those levels. The edition and the reading experience. But it comes with a caveat, because look at the size of this thing. This is a year's worth of reading for most readers. And even industrious readers. This is a huge investment of time and energy. And I've had people say over the decades, well, I read a bit of it, or I read an extensive plot summary of it, and it doesn't seem like it's worth spending that much time on. I get the same thing often about Tale of Genji, that yes, it's a very long book, but in addition to that, it's about a horrible lech. So why should I spend that much time? I don't know what to say about such questions. They seem very, very far off the mark to me, but if we're not asking that question, if we're just assuming that 80 million Frenchmen can't be wrong, if we're just assuming that this book has not just been blindly revered by so many readers over the decades and centuries, then the other caveat becomes it's such an investment of time. And that is a little dicier. A lot of you are very busy people, even in quarantine. And when quarantine starts to lift, you'll be going back to school, you'll be going back to class, you have families and loved ones and responsibilities and children and exercise and personal hygiene. And this is a huge thing to ask, to squeeze into all of that. I understand that completely, and there's a part of me that hesitates to strongly recommend this, because the time that it would take you to read this is the time that you could read Gulliver's Travels, The House of Mirth, the autobiography of Frederick Douglass, the speeches of Winston Churchill or Abraham Lincoln, a million things. In other words, you could read Leaves of Grass several times over in the time it would take you to read this. So, and I understand that for most people, reading time is a precious commodity, because I actually meant, in addition to that long list of other things, you all also go unconscious, completely drooling unconscious for 10 hours out of every 24. So you don't even have, we're not even starting with 24 hours. We're starting with 12 hours. And from that 12 hours, you have to pull every single thing you need to do. And that makes this look horrifying, and I understand that. And a part of me is hesitant, because there's the time that could be spent on this could be spent on so many other things as well. So your Penguin Classic is a guarded recommend. If this strikes your fancy, and you're wondering if it's worth it, it is. It is worth it. It is one of the longest novels ever written, and tremendously moving. It's tremendously effective. So that's your Penguin Classic for today. I would ordinarily say at this point, who knows what we'll encounter tomorrow. Could be something longer, could be something shorter, but there isn't anything longer. So it will have to be something shorter, and we'll see what it is tomorrow. Thank you, BookTube.